We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
Hey everybody, it's Boysen Hodgson. Welcome back to the Mankind Podcast. This is for Brandon, Christine, and Bindi. Dear new dad, your fear is welcome. Here's a place where you can lay it down, just for these few lines. That pain you feel in your chest is a new kind of love. It is here to open you. There is no way to resist it or reframe it, divert it, avoid it. Stop. Don't run. Remember. Let it transform you and shine. Magnified through the tears in your eyes, let it penetrate and unsettle in you all that needs to be shaken awake. To free it more, to burn away what is dry and ready to go. Let it unfold you in those places where you are creased and hidden, a seed splitting in dark soil. Let it reveal in you something unseen, a latent magic made for this time. Let it set the table with community, gathering within and without green sprouts and manna to sustain you. You have a bounty within you. Let this love bring the feast. Dear new dad, there is fear laid aside just there, but this love can hold it. Let it. My heartfelt congratulations to Brandon, Christine, and Bindi Rose Clift, born November 7th, 2022. This is Boysen Hodgson. I'm filling in for Brandon just to announce this show today. Today, Brandon and Jordan Bowman get together to talk about, of all things, raising kids in community. Jordan is a favorite on the show. He's back from the Journeyman Triangle organization to talk about his work with Journeyman through the framework of rites of passage, of mentoring, and community building. This show is about making mistakes, about telling stories, and inviting our kids into a powerful sense of community through empowerment. It's about understanding people as a process. It's about humility and vulnerability and agency, freedom, and responsibility. This is a conversation between two young men looking at parenthood, fatherhood, and community in a way that makes me really hopeful. There are new ways of being and seeing as a parent, and so many great efforts happening in our culture to support this movement. So again, congratulations, Brandon and Christine. Welcome to the Mankind Podcast. I hope you enjoy the show.
Jordan, welcome to the show, mate.
It's good to be here.
It's good to have you back, man. It was so great to have you join us in our little panel discussion in one of our previous episodes, and I really admire, just your eloquence, your ability to be in the conversation, to move it in different directions. Like, you clearly are someone who I judge has done a lot of integrating and has a lot of experience in the topics that you work within and the spaces that you exist. So grateful to have you here, man, as we talk about supporting boys into manhood.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here. Joining us from the East Coast, both of us here.
I know. So nice to be in the same time zone, finally. Yeah. So, mate, tell us a bit about yourself and your story, as well as the Journeyman Triangle.
Yeah, so I've been involved with a group called Journeyman Triangle. We've been around since 2008, 2009, officially becoming a nonprofit in 2012. But we work with teenage boys, and we help them develop into becoming men, good men, men of integrity, guys who are self-aware, emotionally intelligent, understand how to turn their pain into a gift, etc. And that process for me has been fundamental in making me who I am. I had a group of men come for me and challenge me and support me. I had parents who understood that I was moving from one phase of life to another around my teenage years, and that ceremony and ritual and marker was really important for that. And for me, growing up, realizing, hey, I want to give this to as many young people as possible, really is the fire that I fed to lead me to where I am today, serving as the executive director, Journeyman Triangle, working with organizations like the Mankind Project, where we find a lot of our mentors, where I do my own personal development work, and yeah, doing these rites of passage adventure weekends multiple times a year, doing group mentoring ongoing with teenage boys. So that's kind of where I find you today in my journey and what I'm interested in, where my fire is.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, if for the listeners out there, if you've been listening to the show for any period of time, you know that we have covered rites of passage. We've covered the importance of these transitional experiences that help boys and men be able to identify the parts of themselves that no longer serve, that need to be snipped, that need to move out of the way so that a new way of being can present itself, can integrate into our lives. And those teen years are, traditionally, if we look at many different cultures all throughout history, elders in those various populations would take the boys, would take the teenagers and take them through an experience, a rite of passage of sorts that would test them, challenge them, so that a part of them can die, right? There needs to be that death to then bring in the subsequent rebirth. And oftentimes in the modern world as we know it, those rites of passages aren't present in culture, right? We see those in hazing at fraternities, right? We've seen that in gang violence, right? Getting involved into gangs to find that sense of connection, to find that sense of that purpose and community. And so something like Journeyman Triangle, I would judge is so incredibly important. So I want to ask you, Jordan, what path are many of these boys and kids heading down without, if they weren't to come across, say, like the Journeyman Triangle?
Yeah. I think you articulated a good point, is that rites of passage exist even if they aren't intentional. That's kind of what I heard in what you were saying, is that there are negative rites of passage events. So when the community doesn't honor and hold space for important markers, there are these times where, there's hazing, there's, the first time I drive the car is when I get my license. Then as a teenager, I go and I steal mom's car and I do go for a joyride, right? So when the community doesn't intentionally honor and say, hey, this is important, we're infusing you with freedom and responsibility, and those two are connected, then these kind of unintentional rites of passages happen, and they're really dictated and governed by, I think, forces like social media, encouraged by, in my opinion, people who are lost, maybe a more nihilistic, hedonistic viewpoint of life that's disconnected from the wisdom of the elders. So I would say young people who they're all looking for belonging, but the ones who don't find belonging in a community that will honor and respect the man they're becoming, specifically with the boys we work with, then they're going to find it in any group, and they're desperate for it. I mean, there's the risk here of, you could see groups like incels or school shooters, or these groups where young men can find belonging in a really toxic environment. And if they don't have another choice, that is their choice, because it is a human need to find belonging and acceptance.
Yeah, to find belonging, and you see that, of course, with the incels, finding that common experience, that shared experience. Whereas these rites of passages that you're putting on aren't necessarily linked to a common experience, because each individual is going to be going through a very different transformation in their own rights. But it's almost like just creating a vessel in which that discovery can occur without having to associate an identity where you're a theta, beta, theta, that, something separate to yourself and your identity and your individual personal wants and needs. And I'm not here to hate on frats. Many of my dearest friends, my dad was in KA or whatever, Kappa Alpha, I don't know. he was in that stuff. Some of his deepest friends and experiences came from that. But what we're mainly talking about is something that almost transcends the normal world, right? An experience that almost has an element of separation from everything that I've known to be black and white in my existence up to this point.
Yeah.
That's what I find that's what I find so fascinating about the teenage journey, because I went through this as a young adult, right? As a young adult going through the Mankind Project, the New Warrior training. And I often think like, man, if I had something like this in my teen years, I can think about those, stealing the mum's keys to joyride with the car. I can think of so many examples of that, whether it's just going out trying to get laid, right? Or trying to convince a woman to come home with me, or, right? There's so many, sending stuff up my nose, like all sorts of things that I might have been able to approach differently with more self-awareness. If having been able to have those experiences,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of men involved with MKP would resonate with that. I wish I had something like this when I was a teenager, because what happened was there was no one to guide me, and there was no one to really connect me to reality and help me really struggle and see what life is about, and to learn as a process. And because of that, I got hurt, and I hurt other people. And now I'm looking back and I'm doing this trauma work years later. And I think, so the foundation of this work, Journeyman, and was founded by guys who were involved with MKP, who said, hey, I wish I had this when I was a teenager. And so we exist in a pretty small way, I think, on the grand scale of things in North Carolina. We're not a huge organization, and there's groups like us across the country. There's Boys to Men groups, there's Making Manhood, there's Young Warriors Ultimate Adventure. These guys are doing awesome work. Yeah, BAM. Yeah.
BAM, up in Chicago and beyond. Yeah.
Youth Passage. But it's we're tying into something where it's like, how do we reclaim that culture of really creating intention and ritual around that threshold for young men and for young women, but Journeyman specifically focuses on boys. So
yeah, absolutely. So mate, there's a couple topics here that we spoke about before diving in that kind of set the stage, right? Or at least are the meat and potatoes of the workshops that you do in helping support boys into manhood. And one of them, first up, is that idea of helping these boys transition from dependence to independence. So give us kind of like the 30,000 foot view, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah.
And go a bit further of understanding that transition.
So we kind of subscribe to this model of human development that looks at the big picture, where humans go from dependence to independence to interdependence and then to transcendence. So that's like the arc across time. And specifically with teenagers, with the threshold of adolescence, we're looking at the move from dependence to independence. But it's not super static like that. I mean, these exist everywhere. Yeah, so that's the big picture. And I can go into maybe some of the like developmental or historical backdrop if you want.
Yeah, no, please set the scene.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're a kid, when you're a toddler, so Brandon, who you're welcoming a child into the world pretty soon here.
Any day.
Any day.
Yeah.
So congrats on that. And
thank you.
I'm sure you either know this or you'll realize this, but that kid is going to be dependent on you for years. And when it cries, it is not wrong, right? It says it cries, and then you have to fix it. And as a young person's growing up, they're crying, and then they get older, and then they're whining, and then they learn words, and they're complaining, and they're arguing, right? But the message is, I'm not okay, and someone else needs to do something about it. Sure. That's dependence. And then as you're moving into independence, and just to be clear, like with addiction, that still exists. I think addiction is a state of dependence, right? We talk about that. So even in adults,
yeah, of course,
I'm not okay, and someone else needs to do something about it. moving to that infusion of freedom and personal responsibility would make that shift of what can I do about the thing that I'm struggling with right now. And that shift is, the role of initiation first is that when I face my pain, it will become a gift. And I think that's a really important aspect in moving from dependence to independence. But no longer are young people like, they might still be asking their parents or their mentors to say, I'm not okay and someone else needs to do something about it. And the role of initiation is to help them shift their viewpoint and to be a little more responsible and have a little more freedom in their life, increasingly. And then later learning about, I need to connect to a community. I need to connect to ideals that are higher as those next two transitions. But yeah, that's the big picture. I'll kick it back to you. See what you think about that.
I love that you start there, because that, I believe, is giving these young boys that are growing quickly what they want, really. It's just navigating that gap between, look, hey, you inherently are going to be striving for independence long before you're going to have independence, right? You're going to want the freedom before you can legally drive the car or get your own place and move out, right? No longer be a dependent. So you're kind of bridging that gap by helping parents or caregivers or mentors be aware that we need to start giving responsibility to these young boys to help them know what that looks like. And that, in fact, responsibility equals freedom, right? Having that ownership over an agency over their lives, even from a young age, will in turn equal that freedom. But it's going to look different than the model they were used to when they were toddlers and very young boys.
Absolutely.
So there's like a transition or a shift there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And even said a different way, like freedom is a precursor, is required for responsibility. And that also means freedom to mess up, freedom to fail, which would get into a later, one of the other points, around how do you let your kid fail?
Yeah.
But
That's
like,
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and what you were saying around like that, there's a strong drive for independence, right? For teenage boys. I mean, I know for me, right? Like I was like, I want to be able to like make my own rules and follow and find my own way outside of my parents' control. Super important. And the modern reality is that this drive exists long before me or any other teen could actually do that. Right?
Sure.
There's this concept of delayed adolescence we talk about, right? Like there's this, we've extended that time because the desire to do it kind of comes up in us way earlier than we may be able to.
Right. And of course, you need to then look at the other parties involved in this relationship, which are the mentors, the parents, the caregivers, that are in their own way psychologically having to navigate this, relinquishing of the white knuckles perhaps, or, how much control do I relinquish? How much autonomy and agency do I give this kid as they grow? And I'm sure very different parenting models in different homes are going to have very, very different ideas of what that looks like. So that's also something to navigate too. It's easy to think, as much as I have in my life, in this work, spoken about teens and boys, whether in schools, whether in this kind of format, like the podcast, I often come back to the same place of parents sometimes looking at this as like, the boys have a problem. So easy to look at it from that lens. Well, they've got a problem. And I need to step in to try and help them fix it.
Yeah.
Whereas what I love about your work, as much as you're spending time with the boys and the teenagers, you're also educating the parents, the caregivers.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
got to be both, right? It's got to be a both end.
Yeah. It truly takes a village, is kind of the language we use, is that you can initiate young men and teach them how to be more independent and teach them how to have responsibility and understand the relationship between responsibility and freedom and to be more emotionally intelligent. But then when you spit them back into a culture that has a tendency to overmanage the situation where that teen wants independence, but they can't really get it there. They can't really do it yet. When you throw them back into that environment, it sets up a passive aggressive relationship. I mean, I think parents, and God bless them, I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to this, but working with parents and helping them understand our model, a lot of them, like, they get it. They light up. They're like, oh, like, I've been over managing and not speaking to that drive for independence that my kid has in a way that they can actually receive, because the kid is going to fight the parent. They're going to fight
naturally.
Yeah. I mean, and especially naturally, because they're avoiding going to battle with the real thing, which is their life, right? They're going to fight the control structure, what they see as a control structure. So we help parents understand that. How do I move from that control to more of an influence? How do I speak to what might otherwise set up a passive aggressive relationship? How can I, there's this concept of like, they need to figure out how to manage themselves. The teenage boys have to figure that out, or someone else or something else will control them. If they don't learn independence, they'll be dependent on someone else or something else. That could be the parent. It could be another entity out there.
I love that. I really love that, because what you're then doing as well is raising teenagers to be critical thinkers as well, right? Because they're not going to be controlled by a popular narrative that's happening, whether it's in one of the binary battlefields that has been created right now, which I'm so guilty of jumping into those at times. It's going to give them that ability to really self-monitor the influences in their lives. And it's tough, especially if we're talking like hormonally. I'm sure there's a hormonal element of this, especially with testosterone. In one of the trainings I did with MKP, they spoke about the, kind of the natural order of wolves and like a wolf pack. Not to say that it's 100% relatable to the human experience, but oftentimes like the head of the pack is going to be challenged naturally. As younger male wolves start to get that flood of hormones, they start to get a bit more mass and size and tenacity and experience and ferocity and confidence. And that will naturally happen in a lot of households between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. And so it's almost like making sure that parents can be aware that, hey, guess what? There is no linear way through this. Anticipate it being messy. Anticipate an element of control, like your control shifting in a way to allow more of that for the individual, right? For the teenager.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, and then from there, how do you let your teen fail more, right? How do you let your teen, because how am I as a parent, if I ask myself this question, how am I over managing their transition to independence? I mean, I think asking those questions are super important as a caregiver, as a mentor, as a parent.
What are some answers that you've heard from parents when you've asked them that, or when they've asked themselves that?
I think in theory, the idea of letting your kid fail is like, yeah. But like in practice, it's really difficult. That's what I hear a lot. It's like, sure, like I want to let my kid fail, but how do I do it as like a controlled fall? Like if they fail this class junior year of high school, then they're not going to be able to get into a good college. Then they're not going to get a good job. Then they're going to be a failure in life. Like, so there's like a lot of anxiety because the parents have the longer term view, right?
Sure.
The kid's thinking about next week and who he's going to play video games with, right? And is this girl going to say yes when he asks him out?
Oh, and here's a common experience, right? A common phrase. I don't want him to make the same mistakes I made.
Yeah.
And I witnessed this in a circle I was in, a dad having challenges with his teen. And one of the elders in the room, just men that have been around a long time in this work, said, what if they did? What if they did make the same mistake you made? And then we realized very quickly it wasn't about what was going to happen to the teenager if they made that same mistake. It was the dad going, if he makes the same mistake I made, then that says more about me.
Yeah.
and my parenting and my influence or lack thereof on this kid.
Absolutely.
That's a tricky one to navigate.
Well, and you have this parallel thing going on, right? So as the young person is thinking about identity and is thinking about moving from dependence to independence and understanding who am I as a human? What are my dreams? What are my passions? How do I separate from the world? Like, to use some of the language you were using before of the hero's journey, a rites of passage creating the separation so they can really fully explore who they are and who they will be. I think the parent is going through a similar journey because their identity for the last 15, 16 years has been as the parent of Johnny or Sally or whoever it is. They have been a parent, and so now they're thinking about can I detach from that identity? How do I attach from that identity? While also encouraging my young person to detach from the relationship we're in, where I'm the manager, and they're the employee, or I'm I'm above them in the hierarchy, versus now I'm welcoming them up onto the level of adulthood with me, and I am an advisor. I'm an influencer. I get to influence their decision instead of control it or force it.
I love that. It's almost like you can have a renegotiation of a relationship. You know, I love that. I've been speaking to more. I've found with impending parenthood coming my way, I say that in such a negative tone. I've never been more excited. That's just my one little cynical part of me that likes to say stuff like that.
Parenthood incoming.
Incoming, yeah. So I've got a set of dad mentors.
Okay.
Dads that I really, really look up to. Dads that have made humongous mistakes. Dads that have been through all the highs and lows. And one of them shared with me that, you know, when they started to feel their little young and up and coming wolf want to start to assert some energy and create some space for themselves as they're growing up, they just had a really candid conversation of like, okay, you want your bedtime to be later? Sure. You want to be able to stay out past when the street lights turn on? Sure. But here's what it looks like going forward. Here's what that will look like for you. You're going to have greater responsibilities around the house. Plain and simple. Like, you like that you get 3 meals a day? Cool. You're going to start contributing to that too, right? Just really starting to kind of lay things out and say, I will bless this freedom that you want, but just know up until the point that you're off doing your own thing, right, out of this house, and we then renegotiate our relationship then, this is what it's going to look like. And I found that really intriguing. And it sounds like it sounded more eloquent coming out of his mouth, I'm sure, in retrospect than it did at the time, of course. And according to him, it worked really well. But that's kind of that in practice, right? Having those conversations with the teenager as much as they may not want to have the conversation with you, Dad.
Yeah, I mean, it's wise. It's a wise move, and I don't think it's intuitive for everyone. I mean,
no, it's do as I say for so long, right? Because I said so, and that message, that the weight behind that line diminishes an older a kid gets, right?
There's a point when you have to detach from insulating your young person from the world. Like, you're getting ready to insulate your kiddo from all the dangers around them, right? And then 15 years later, let's have another conversation about what it looks like to no longer insulate themselves from the pain or the difficulty or the hardship of the world, and to allow them to fail and to go out. I think one of the I'll mention this, but one of the Michelangelo has the sculpture of Mary like holding like Jesus, and his body is like broken and tattered and like destroyed. And I think of that as like, what a badass mom.
Yes.
To say like, I'm going to let my son go, and he's going to get destroyed and and beat up. I mean, that takes so much courage as the mom. It's something that comes to mind of like maybe an archetype or an ideal of that. I'm not saying it's easy. It's just, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
If you're enjoying the Mankind podcast, how about taking another step? This one takes some courage, and you have it. Check out the Men's Work Introduction. It's 3 sessions over 3 weeks. New sessions start every month, and we even have a cohort tailored to LGBTQ men. Find out more in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure. And so that takes me back to a conversation I had with a man by the name of Dene Maria Sebastiana. Anyone who's listened to this podcast knows that he's been on a couple times. And when we got pregnant, I booked a call with him just to chat with him about all the feelings and stuff that was going on, what was coming up for me. And he, in no uncertain terms, just said, speak to the fucking fear. Just go there. Mm-hmm. What is the fear, as irrational as it may sound? And it was like, I'm going to fuck this kid up. I'm just going to ruin this kid. And he said, one, your job as a parent is to wound your kid, which I've never heard that before. He goes, if you don't wound your kid is likely to deify you, make you the model and the archetype of what it means to be man, woman, or whatever. And they will then try and walk in your shoes. And he said, in my experience, there is nothing worse than trying to create a clone to walk every step that you've taken. What you need, and I'm totally paraphrasing his words at this point. This is my interpretation. But they are 50% your mum, 50% biologically mum, 50% dad, and then all the nature and nurture in between is going to make that kid an individual. And through your mistakes, through your wounding, they're going to learn quite thoroughly what is what for them in their young development years of trying to figure out what is black and white, what is hot, what is cold, right? I found that intriguing. Oh, okay, permission to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Right, that's okay. And then he said something else in that call. He goes, I was talking about, so now this kid comes into my life. I have this fear of like all this selfishness, all this autonomy, all these things I've been able to do for me is now, I need to do this for the child. I need to provide for the child. And he said, what if the child was put on this planet for you as opposed to the opposite? And I found that interesting because that kind of goes against some of the traditional ideas of the role of the parent is you're there just to nurture the child into surviving and making it through the phases of life. And it was like, hey, no, what if they're the teacher for you?
Yeah.
And I think there's the opportunity, right? There's the opportunity for the parents whose boys go through your program is to turn that learning inwards for themselves.
Absolutely.
To see, what is this kid teaching me about me?
Well, and to say it just a different way, to use the framework that we use in Journeyman is maybe that's your move from independence to interdependence. And maybe in order to be a good dad or to be a good member of the family, you need to learn about independence within the context of having transcendent ideals. You have to believe in something greater than yourself and even greater than the community. Like this concept of like, let's raise good humans in a society. Right. So there's obviously an interdependent relationship there from where I'm sitting. Like, yeah, it obviously works both ways. And of course you're going to wound your kid. Some people, like, that's not your main goal. I wouldn't say like, don't take that job too seriously, but
yeah, for real, please don't.
but you're going to, and that's okay. Because they're going to learn and grow from it. And hopefully there are more spaces and there are more communities that will really encourage humility and encourage vulnerability and encourage the movement from, hey, this is something that hurt. This is a pain I experienced. How do I move through that? How do I turn that back into a gift? And then I can offer it back to community.
I love that. So we've covered some great territory here, right? We've spoken about dependence to independence, interdependence to transcendence, right? There's that journey that both the caregiver, the parenting role, and the child, like the boy, the teenager, is going through as well, and then shifting from control to influence, right? So I'm relinquishing some of the tracks and the rails in which I expect this kid to be on, to allow them to color inside the lines, or perhaps outside the lines, how they see fit, right? How it calls to them. And then you mentioned community. How important is community in this process?
I'm biased. I run a community organization, but it's paramount. I mean, I think the nuclear family on its own is nothing if you don't consider the context in which it sits. So there's been a lot of like institutions or technologies that have been the gathering place for community. I think for a long time it was churches. It's also like community centers, sporting events, in some ways bars for parents, like get a pint and talk about how hard it is. But this idea of community in the process during times of transition, I think is paramount, because there's two things going on there. There is, you get to practice your life in community. So you have a place to fail. And it is more of that controlled fail. So I get to be a part of, so as a teenager, my experience as a teenager, very selfish, right? Like it was me, right? I have been edifying and developing my personal identity. And then when I'm in community, and specifically in a community that values intergenerational wisdom, then it's not just about me. It's about my place in a larger context. And when I have this group saying, hey, like, who do you want to be? What do you want? And how are you going to get there? And they're kind of doing, like, to use a psychology term, they're doing like motivational interviewing for me. A lot of what our mentors do is motivational interviewing. So encouraging young people to discover and name their wants, and then asking them questions to consider, is that action in alignment with what you want? Is that going to get you what you want? They don't always line up. And so for me, having a mentor who I look up to, asking me that question was a lot different than my dad or my mom doing that.
And that's a really important point to kind of elucidate what you just said. This is a good time to do this, because that's a conversation I've had with my father, who, through a very traditional, he filled the traditional role quite well as a father. But I remember there was a time where he really was trying to be everything for me. And I kind of had to, through a lot of trial and error, kind of establish, like, Dad, you fulfill this role very well. But I have another mentor to teach me that, right? Or this. And to know, like, that's a big talking point that I've shared with parents when I've done some speaking in schools, talking about teens and boys, is that, look, you're going to fail if you try and be everything for your kid. You can't, you are not the pinnacle of man, and you don't have to be. If your boy wants to grow up and be, like you said, a kind, good citizen in this world, just a good man, you're setting them up for failure if you're making yourself the archetype. Yeah. Because that's too much pressure. Way too much pressure. Right? When your kid knows all your cracks better than anyone, if they've been living with you.
Well, and they'll project it onto you for a long time. They'll project, like you were saying, deify. They will. I mean, in some real sense, you are God to them as a kid. Like you are, like, oh my gosh, this amazing thing, and it probably
food, shelter, water, warmth, survival. Right?
Probably, I'm imagining that would just light you up. Like when people speak about the joys of parenthood, I think they're speaking about the golden projection, this thing that's being placed on them by this beautiful, like, innocent, amazing, lovely, growing thing, human. And there's a point where you fall from that. Right? You will fall from that. And I think in our community in Journeyman, it's really important that mentors, and then we also encourage parents to, of course, honor their own boundaries, but be vulnerable. Or be vulnerable with teens around, like, look, I messed up. Like, this is where I fucked up. And, like, that's okay. And, and then where have you fucked up? Like, where have you messed up before? And so... And anyways, I'm riffing off that, but it's super important to to have a space where you can be vulnerable, and see the flaws and see that it's going to take will for effort. You're going to have to, you're not just going to be perfect all the time, just like your parents aren't perfect.
No, I have to say, I'm so proud of my sister. She and my brother-in-law went through a separation, and it hit my nephews really hard. And I'm so proud of my sister because she had communicated very early in it that she was sad and that she was angry, and that like she really made that clear. And it's as the boys navigated that really challenging, tricky, emotional, super sad experience, they almost in their own little divine wisdom knew like, okay, let's give mum a break today. I think we need to give mum a break today. We're not gonna have that tantrum and run to her, blaming the other for something at the age of like 7 and 5, which I think that's really important. That humanizes parents to the child. And I think largely that's been missing, hasn't it? Really, in broader culture. Like it really is a new kind of phenomenon than what the nuclear family and the traditional roles look like not that long ago. Yeah.
Well, and with men specifically, I think, I all of my friends, like, did you have the talk with your dad, or did your dad ever talk about emotions with you? I feel lucky because my dad like did in a lot of ways. And there was still this like, we live in a culture where that stoicism and that, we don't talk about it, or it might come out like in a football game or something.
Or it comes out when someone knocks into me and spills my beer and I shove my glass in their face, you know? Yeah. Like that happens. That really does. That unchanneled, that untapped emotion that's just building up and steaming. It happens for a lot of men. They don't have a place to channel that in a healthy way. And it usually, unfortunately, ends up at the, in very horrible, in many of the ways that men have perpetrated a lot of things. In a lot of things. And so go ahead.
I just wanted to say, again, I was thinking about my dad, and I wanted to give him another shout out because one of the things he did that was really important for me, and I'm lucky to have this, was he had the humility and the courage and the wisdom to tell me that, and to really know that he couldn't be everything I needed. And to share with me that a community of mentors, that he was helping initiate me or helping steward me into the care of the community, with other guys who could mentor me and teach me things, where he was no longer going to say like, look, this is what you have to do. It's now, well, you get to choose. I've spent, 17, 18 years training and teaching you, but from my perspective, I imagined him really having that being difficult to step back and say, I can be an advisor and influence. I can influence your decisions, but I can't control them, and I can't be everything to you. So you're going to have to reach out to these other guys. And so what's really important about what we do with Journeyman is like, we offer that. We give dads an opportunity to notice that. We give mentors an opportunity to mentor young men, and we give young men the opportunity to receive input and wisdom from the community versus from one person or two people.
Yeah. That's amazing that you had that experience with your dad. And I'm very grateful to mine for being able to show empathy and relate to me in many ways. So shout out to all the dads and parents out there that are doing the best they can with what they know. As long as they're committed to growth, right? And learning from all things, good, bad, ugly, in between. Like, yeah, shout out to the dads. I'm already giving myself a preemptive pat on the back for the future of parenthood. But no, I think that's so important. I remember like some of the most important things for me as a teenager going through challenging experiences was the times when my dad didn't try and fix my problems, but shared a story of when he went through it. Right? Because that allowed me to connect to him and humanize him more, remove some of that, you're here to fix my problems kind of expectation as a child, to then go, oh, wow, you're kind of a contemporary in a sense of like relating on that cool level where he felt more like a mentor than a a parent per se, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of nice because from the parent lens back then, it was more often than not, yeah, fat chance, screw you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do what you tell me. Yeah, what do you know that I don't already know at the wise age of 16?
Yeah. I mean, and stories are powerful, like you mentioned. Like the stories will, they're an ancient way of learning and teaching. They've been around for a long time, and this idea of I can tell you a story and be vulnerable about where I messed up, and trust that you won't like use that against me to not follow my influence, but trusting that you'll take that for what it's worth. Advice and like you said before, like maybe they will make the same mistake. The difference between parents and mentors that's important mentioning here is that mentors are a lot less attached to the outcome. Like, I can advise a young person and I can share with them what I think, and I can ask them if what they're doing is in alignment with their goals. Whereas like the parent has to live with the outcome of that, and I don't.
Yeah.
So what's really important, what we found with Journeyman, is having a community that can give this kind of almost detached. I mean, they're still attached, but they're less attached to the outcome.
Yeah.
And give advice and share, while also the parents, we're reinforcing this on both sides. We're really using the whole village to raise up the kid, because
Right. But you're presenting skinny branches in a way. It's like you're presenting them with that separation of, am I going to be okay? Am I not going to be okay? Right. That's what those rite of passages almost inherently have to be founded upon, is that, yeah, this is going to feel dangerous. This is, and that's, I guess, to me, that's where I make the link between that letting go of the control so much, allowing those controlled falls, but it's got to feel like the stakes are high in a way in this transition. Like it's got to, otherwise, where's the buy-in? Where's how are they going to remember that experience? And for a parent to allow that, I think is, I can see how that goes both ways. I can really see how that, because I mean, I look at some of the things I got up to, like, kind of backpacking around Europe and going out, doing drugs and all sorts of stuff. Like, I don't know, from the seat I'm sitting in right now, I'm already crossing the river too early. The kid's not even born. But how did my parents handle that? Fortunately, it wasn't drinking, but they handled it somehow. Yeah. And I know I'm going to be calling them going, oh, I'm so sorry, Mum and Dad. I'm so sorry for everything.
Yeah. Well, I've already begun some of that. Like, what? How did you deal with me? I share this sometimes with the technology where it's at. One day I'm going to be parenting and I'm going to say, don't do this. And then the kid's going to pull up a video of me doing it.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
sorry, not to scare you.
Tell me about it. Oh God, I can tell you right now, I don't know if you're as reckless as me, but like, I'm never going to be a mayor. Someone will find something I've done stupid, like getting shot with fireworks or
my hope is that our society will learn to understand people as a process, and will understand to appreciate people as a rough draft. Because I do think it is really, this is a completely different topic, but I do think it's really toxic to kind of crucify people to what they did or said once at one time.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so happy you said that, because that's a big piece of Tony Porter's message from A Call to Men is, we got to start calling people in instead of calling them out. Because when I call someone out, I am essentially othering them. I am diagnosing them as inherently wrong, broken, corrupt, evil. And when I do that, I can no longer see the human and the human experience in that person. Yeah. And that's that. Yeah, I think that's really important. And so that also needs to be said for self-judgment. Right? Yeah. Self-judgment of things that I've done in my past. Like, I can think of a couple things that I'm just, I want to vomit, and But there's got to be that awareness at least of like, okay, well, what work's been put in since? You know,
and
what reconciliation, what forgiveness, what, you know, what good faith has been given forward for some of my mistakes. And if we can't allow that, then we can't rehabilitate people that have made mistakes. We can't welcome them back into society, and we'll continue to create those divides.
Yeah.
Because we're going to continue to other and separate them.
And my mind goes to, where are the spaces where that can happen? And that's encouraged. Like, where are the spaces where I can look at where I messed up, or look at the uglier parts of my shadow or my experience, and be held by a container or a community that says like we're not absolving you from that. We're not telling you that's okay, but we're encouraging you to carry that burden in a way that might serve your trajectory, that might serve the world, these values like responsibility, integrity, accountability. And Journeyman's doing that. Journeyman's doing that from a teenage lens. And the parents we work with, the parents of our boys, I think are learning more about that. The mentors are actively doing that. Mankind Project's doing that. There are a lot of spaces that this is being really kind of brought out. And it's hard when the opposite of this, like the foil of this, is like just right in our face. It's like intimate and immediately like cancel culture this, or you know Twitter, like, yeah, we'll just say Twitter.
yeah, exactly.
But I've strongly been like a believer of like being a builder, like building something different versus just tearing down the thing that exists. And so I don't know, hats off to all the people building spaces who are kind of bringing this in, ushering this in for us.
Yeah, I love that, man. And hats off again, if I can just throw some more hats, because I have so many hats to throw. Just throwing out hats left and right. Look under your chair. You get a hat. You get a hat. To those that are able to mind the gap when someone says something that is hurtful, when someone says something that is offensive, whether to yourself or to someone else, those that can mind the gap and pull someone aside and ask them, hey, how open are you to looking at the potential impact of what you just said, rather than doing it on a public format like Twitter, rather than doing it in a room where there's a crowd, where you can make a scene, right, and make a really powerful point by actually seeking the humanity in that person who said something that you disagree with. And giving them an opportunity to look at it. And guess what? They may say F you and double down. That may happen. But in my experience, and I can only speak for my experience, not a single person has done that. Every single one of them has either said, thank you, I wasn't aware of that, or that was a blind spot, or they've just said, yeah, I shouldn't have said that. I knew that wasn't the right thing to say, and I said it anyway. And I'm sorry. And we can all move together peacefully as continuous friends and family. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if it hadn't been done for me. Yeah. If I hadn't said the racist thing in front of someone of difference, right? Of obviously non-Anglo-Saxon descent, right? I had to say those things. To make those mistakes, to touch those stoves, to learn. And I don't know if I had a strong enough will or mind if those people were to call me out in those moments. I don't know if I had enough self-awareness to not be one of those people that doubled down. Right? Just as a defense mechanism to try and protect myself. Whereas they gave me a chance. They saw the humanity in me to give me an opportunity to kind of look at, hey, where's that coming from?
If I could,
that's self-awareness, man.
And if I could like wave a magic wand and infuse some things in the development of young people, maybe directly in the school system, maybe there's all sorts of ways to do it. But if we could teach humility as a virtue, and teach self-awareness, and this idea like we could create a world where people are connected to each other and compassionate, that would be what I would do. It'd be, hopefully it's what I'm doing and hopefully achieving in a small way. I'd like to achieve it in a bigger way. Hopefully this conversation will steward some more people to get inspired and do something similar. But yeah, connection, compassion, humility, right? What does that look like to be in the messy work of being in community together?
The messy work, you just said it. Yeah. It's messy. It's not perfect. It's not clean. And that's something I think we start identifying. You know, I made a mistake not long ago, and Boysen, co-host of the show, he said something that really helped me get out of my shame spiral. He said, when I stop making that mistake, I'll start giving you a hard time. And that acknowledgement was it was so humanizing to go, hey, you've made a mistake. I've made that mistake. We're human here. You're not perfect. No one is. But unfortunately, people get called out if they're not, by people who most certainly aren't perfect.
Yeah.
And that's a thing. And your world, your magic wand, mate, that's the world I want to see. I want to contribute to and be a part of. So, and you're doing it, man. You are doing it. The Journeyman Triangle is having an impact on many lives, and I see no reason why this won't push outside the boundaries of North Carolina, the Southeast, and go further. It's people like you, mate, that are doing this work, that are bringing people's attention towards these very necessary and very important rites of passages and experiences that young boys and teenagers need to go through to be more compassionate, more kind, have that humility. So, mate, tell us about Journeyman Triangle. How can our listeners find out more? How can they get their kids on those weekends? And how can we support you in your mission going forward?
Yeah. Well, I just want to respond to your piece there around, the trust. People are afraid that if they say this piece, hey, I failed, that people won't trust them anymore. But it's obvious. It's oftentimes the opposite. Hey, I messed up.
I trust you more.
Now.
I trust you more that you made the mistake.
Yeah. Yes. And that you were willing to share it with me. And I think that goes for parents, for mentors, for friends, all sorts of relationships. So yeah, I just wanted to double click, underline that piece. And Journeyman, we don't exist in a vacuum. We work primarily in Raleigh and the Triangle, and in Asheville, North Carolina. And we're part of a larger network. So if your listeners are across the country, the United States, even across the world, we have there's programs called, like we said before, like Boys to Men. You can look them up. There are programs. There's a Journeyman group in Washington State. There's BAM. There's Young Men's Ultimate Adventure Weekend. If you search like mentoring, rites of passage, community mentoring, you'll find these resources. And being a mentor for me was a crucial part of my own personal development. So just for folks out there who are thinking, I don't know if I can be a mentor, like, yes, you can. 50% of it is just showing up. It's showing up and being real. And the kids need you, man. I mean, the need is so overwhelming that I don't know what to do sometimes. And I'm here, and I'd love to invite more people to join me, whether that's by donating or mentoring. But our kids are struggling.
And it's so fulfilling.
Yeah,
it's so fulfilling. It is the best drug. The paying this stuff forward, working with kids and other men, it is the best drug ever.
Yeah.
I've never felt more ecstasy than witnessing that moment that someone gets it, witnessing that moment where a new story is created around trauma, witnessing that moment where someone can look in the mirror and go, oh, wow, I've never actually seen you before, trusted you before, witnessed you before. Like it really is so remarkably life-changing.
Well, because you're working on your relationship with your inner child. I mean, you really are. Like, we're careful not to project onto the young people that we work with, but you're healing that in yourself in this. It's always a two-way street. Mentoring is always a two-way street. And it's super fulfilling. It's super important. I could talk about it for hours, but get out there. I mean, do something, see what you can do. I think, go into the woods, ask yourself, who am I? What am I doing? That's what we do with the teens. And I think more people becoming conscious and awake and aware to these summer things will change the world. I think it's upstream from a lot of problems we're having nowadays. So my information, we're journeymantriangle.org. I can throw my email out in the show notes, and if you're somewhere else that you haven't found a group, I will connect you with someone. But yeah, keep doing it. Keep being parents. Understand that that's an initiation too. That's a hero's journey. And get support. Yeah. So those are all of my call to actions, like bundled into one speech there.
Beautiful. Mate, well, it's been an absolute pleasure. For those of you that have been joining us and listening to this conversation, all of those links will be available in the show notes. And if you want to find out more about Jordan, jump on the Journeyman Triangle, see the amazing work that he's doing, follow him on all the socials. We'll have them up there too. Cool. And I'll tell you, if you have a young man in your life that you may judge or believe could use a little bit of direction, a little bit of purpose, I really say this with all the reverence in the world, mate. Show them Jordan. Send them this interview, because he's a young man doing incredible work. Many of you would be, I think, quite surprised and amazed at his age to be doing. How old are you, Jordan?
27.
27. Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Come on. That's amazing. Absolutely remarkable. So powerful stuff. Grateful to have you guys join us. This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. What do you say, Jordan? We've done that today?
I think we've done it. I think we've, talked about all the context. I love it.
Heck yeah. Drop the very expensive mic. Yeah. Lots of love, guys. We will see you next week.
Cheers.
This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. We have been your hosts, Paul Newell, Boysen Hodgson, and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, you can find links to them in the show notes. Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, we've got to give special thanks to our back-end team, producer, editor, and audio ninja for the show, Michael J. Russer, and Don Huff, who takes care of our graphics and promotions and pretty much makes us look pretty. So, of course, thank you, Don. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener. Because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. What it means for Paul, what it means for Boysen, that is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.